let me also take a moment to compliment you and the Assistant Attorney General for Antitrust, Christine Varney. Under your and her leadership, the Antitrust Division of the Department has made it clear, after many years of neglect, that enforcement of our antitrust laws is a priority for the Department, and I'm especially grateful for the Department's focus on agriculture issues in partnership with USDA, and I was very pleased to hear that the Department will be holding a dairy workshop in Wisconsin in June. This means a great deal to our producers and others in the state of Wisconsin. I turned to a couple other things. Senator Cole asked you about the COPS program. As you know, I strongly support that program and other federal law enforcement assistance grant programs. I hear repeatedly from law enforcement in Wisconsin just how important these grant programs are, particularly during tough economic times. The COPS hiring grants in the Recovery Act allowed my state to hire or rehire 58 police officers, and these were certainly needed in the jurisdictions where they were provided, but I do think it's important that these dollars are distributed fairly between cities and counties. And in meetings I've had recently with Wisconsin law enforcement, it was brought to my attention that Wisconsin sheriffs receive zero COPS hiring grants through the Recovery Act. Law enforcement everywhere are forced to do more with less these days, but this struck me as a bit of an unfair outcome for counties in my state. It's my understanding the Department is looking at possible changes to the grant methodology. Just a bit, sir, on the status of that review, how quickly can we expect it to be modified, and just sort of an update on that effort.
Well, quickly, before I get to that, you're absolutely right that there is a focus in our antitrust division on the whole question of agricultural concerns. I will be attending with Secretary of Agriculture Vilsack a number of forums around the country. I think we have 5 scheduled. We've done one already in Iowa that I did with Senator Grassley. With regard to the question of the allocation of COPS funds, I think sheriffs, I think my numbers are correct, you got about 17% of the money that was awarded last year. We are in the process of looking at the allocation formula that we use. It was based on, is generally based on what the economic condition was in a particular jurisdiction, what the crime rates are in that same jurisdiction. I have talked to representatives of the sheriff's communities, and they raise, I think, very legitimate concerns. And so as we construct the methodology that we're going to be using next year, we will take that into consideration. And I would expect that we will probably have a determination made over the next few weeks as to what exactly the formula is going to be.
Thank you. Prosecutors and public defenders in Wisconsin have been telling me that they're having a harder and harder time attracting and retaining qualified attorneys in their offices, and many of these public servants have had to resort to taking a second job to pay off their law school debt. I'm told that local prosecutor and public defender offices typically have attrition rates between 30 and 50%. This is obviously a serious problem in our criminal justice system, and one of the many reasons I was a supporter of the John R. Justice Prosecutor and Defenders Incentive Act, which created a much-needed student loan repayment program for prosecutors and public defenders. It was enacted in 2008, thanks in large part to the leadership and hard work of Senator Durbin. But DOJ has yet issued guidelines to enable the states to solicit applications for loan assistance. Can you tell me a bit about, update me on the status of our efforts to launch this? When do you expect that prosecutors and public defenders will be able to start applying for assistance?
Well, even in these difficult economic times, I think the wisdom of that act is, from my perspective, relatively obvious. I've been concerned about the state of indigent defense. I've talked about that on a great many occasions. I'm also concerned about what I hear from people who work on the other side, from prosecutors at the state and local levels. To the extent that we can come up with ways in which that we can be of financial assistance to these groups, I think we need to do so. So let me get back to the department and see where we stand with regard to our loan assistance programs and regulations. And I will assure you that this is something that, for me, given the travels that I've had a chance to do over these past 14 months, this is really a priority. I'm really concerned about the state of our local criminal justice system and the ability to hold on to good people who only want to serve their communities. There are economic considerations that are driving good people out of the system.
Thank you for that statement. I'll have a continued interest in this. Law enforcement and correction staff have long known that people with mental illness are significantly overrepresented in our prisons and jails. Our jails and prisons were never intended or not equipped to be treatment facilities for the mentally ill, but unfortunately that's what they've often become. Wisconsin has started looking at this issue and recently convened a task force of law enforcement officers, correction staff, district attorneys, state legislators, and social service providers with the goal of developing a strategic plan to improve Wisconsin's responses to people with mental illness in the criminal justice system. This initiative would not have been possible without the leadership of our Chief Justice in Wisconsin, Shirley Abramson, who was able to obtain some funding for the Council for State Governments to organize this task force. As I understand it, the Council receives department funding for this and other mental health initiatives as a result of the Mental Illness Offender Treatment Crime Act. And while I was pleased that Wisconsin received some assistance for this initiative, it was one of just 4 states that received the aid out of more than 30 states that applied for assistance. We have historically allocated few resources to deal with this complicated problem, yet funding for mental illness programs is one of the most competitive grant programs in the department. Despite the high demand, the President's budget proposes consolidating this important program with the drug courts program. And I'm concerned that that will mean not enough resources for either program. Sir, why was that recommendation made?
Well, I think what we have tried to do is, again, in these very difficult economic times, to come up with ways in which we can be most effective in distributing the limited funds that we have. The concerns that you raise are indeed very legitimate ones. I'm very concerned about the way in which we have deinstitutionalized our facilities and put so many people who I think would do much better in institutions that were well-funded and well-run, and instead we put them in the criminal justice system. I saw that as a judge here in Washington, D.C. What we have tried to do and what we are continue to try to do is to come up with ways in which we can help our state and local partners and help our fellow citizens deal with issues that they have to confront. Putting those two together, it seemed to us to identify ways in which we could consolidate those people who have drug problems and come up with alternatives to simply trying them and incarcerating them, and to also deal with people who have mental issues and come up with ways in which we can help them other than by incarcerating them. We will do the best we can with the resources that we have, but the concern that you raised, I think, is a very legitimate one, and one that I think as a society that we need to focus more attention on. I've witnessed this, as I said, as a judge, and I am very, very concerned about the way in which we treat the mentally ill and the desire to put them in the criminal justice system.
Thank you very much.